Hi, this is Jason Romero, speaker, author of Running Into the Dark and the Success Cycle, and I'm going one-on-one with ADC Partners.
Hey, this is Dave Almy of ADC Partners, and thanks so much for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. I know you got a lot of stuff going on, so appreciate you stopping by, even if it's only for a little bit. And just a quick reminder, you can always find past episodes of this podcast at adcpartners.com/podcast. Now, I'll be honest with you. This is sort of a difficult intro to do for this episode. Like, I want to tell you all about my guest, Jason Romero, to draw you in. But I also don't want to provide any spoilers to our conversation. I just want you to learn about his unbelievable story all on your own. Because his story is just that. It's unbelievable. I promise that when you listen, you'll have a few, oh, wow, moments, followed by, wait, what? Moments, followed by, you've got to be kidding me, moments. I'm just glad I get to share his story with you. I mean, it's inspiring, it's crazy, it's motivational, it's all those things and more. It's a lot of things. But mostly, it's a story about how a man just wouldn't let his light fade. So thanks for listening. And please enjoy my conversation with Jason Romero, the author of Running Into the Dark. When we were getting this whole process started and everything like that, you shared a story of your start in running, which is kind of amazing. I'm going to be honest with you. I remember running upstairs and talking to my wife. He's like, I just talked to the most amazing guy. Can you talk about that start to this part of your journey, right? Your physical condition at that point and how this whole process got started.
So the most recent start to my running journey, which hasn't ceased, has been started really in 2007.
Yeah.
And I was working for General Electric on assignment in Puerto Rico, great cush thing, something I never imagined can happen.
Yep.
And
Nothing but Mai Tais by the pool at that point.
Pina coladas at that time.
There you go.
Lemon Cokes. And one of my children had three children. I have three children, and one of my children had been diagnosed with autism. And I was in my third year in Puerto Rico on an assignment, and he had gotten to the point where it was time for him to enter into school. We got there, he was 2, he was getting ready to be 5 and needed to get to kindergarten and get into school. There weren't schools for kids with autism. And so me and my wife at the time and his occupational therapist and speech therapist started a school for children with autism based on the type of therapy he was receiving at the time, which is called relationship developmental intervention. And
so you, just to clarify, there were no schools available for you, so you needed to create your own for your son.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And for kids on the island. But we saw an opportunity, and there was a deficit there, and there was a huge need. This was like at the beginning of the explosion, really, of autism. So we ended up starting the school, and I was working hard at General Electric. They don't send you on an expat assignment and let you hang out on the beach. So I was burning the candle at all ends, but I was a lot heavier at that time. I was probably like another 30 pounds heavier.
Okay. So Dave Almy size is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was drinking, smoking cigars, fried foods, living the
living the Puerto Rico lifestyle.
The good island life, mañana, it's okay. But we're gonna get it done. And so anyway, I decided, well, maybe I'll run a marathon to try to raise funds for my son's school, because I'd help with the planning, different stuff, but needed to do more, need to do more. And I know every day for Sage is much more difficult than a lot of us, especially for him at that time. But I took a picture of myself, sent it to all my good buddies. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about running a marathon and to raise money for my son's school. And here I am, and I look like a walking heart attack. I was like, will you pledge money for my son? And they said, we'll pledge money just to, because this will be hilarious.
Right. I'll never have to pay out, because there's no way you're going to survive this marathon.
Yeah. There's a contingency you have to live and get across the finish line. So
did you, I'm sorry, but had you ever run before?
So back when I was in law school, which was
Okay.
probably like 15 years before, I had ran a marathon before.
Okay, so there was precedent here. This was something you knew that you could
Yeah.
do. You just weren't necessarily in the physical condition to do it.
Yeah. When I was younger, I had an inspirational event, ran a marathon, hung it up, never did it again.
Okay, you were done.
Yeah, I was done. But this was a point I was kind of coming up on my early midlife, if you will, and I thought it'd be a great thing to do. Well, just getting out the door. I remember when I first went out to train for this thing, I had two neighbors, and they were older than me. Probably one was 15 years older, one was maybe 20 years older than me. And they always went down to a local park that had a circular track, like it was a
Hmm.
track. So I was like, oh, it's cute. I'll go walk with you guys. I'm starting to train for a marathon. And I remember I met the guys, and it's a little hotter in Puerto Rico,
A little
and
warm.
it's high humidity.
Yeah.
But I met them down there after work, and I was like, oh, I'll walk a mile with you guys and go home. And I got out there, and they were, walking like fast walking. So I go out there and I walk with them. And I remember I got, about halfway around one lap, which is an eighth of a mile, and I had broken a sweat, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh
And
my
they're
God.
talking and visiting, and I'm trying to interject, and I can't catch my breath. I get to a quarter mile, and I'm like, I was like, I'm gonna die.
I think I'm
And
done.
yeah, I remember, but I wouldn't tell them that because I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
too much,
Yeah,
too
yeah.
much ego, too much testosterone pride.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, hey guys, I better get home. I need to help out with the kids and this. So I bailed. I got to my car and I was like profusely sweating. I was like, I have totally let myself go. Like, I don't know how this marathon's going to happen. I'm going to die. Like, how's this going to happen? And that began the journey of trying to run, and it really began with Sage and trying to help him out and help some kids. But
Was there a moment, Jason, where you did a lap, you get in the car and you're like, there's no way I could do this.
well, yeah, that had thought passed through my mind, but it wasn't that it was impossible because there was no choice. I had to do it.
Yeah.
I had to do it for my son. So it was going to happen,
You had
or
the proper motivation.
yeah, either you're going to do it or you're going to die trying.
Hmm.
And that's all there was. But yeah, I found a couple other buddies that ran, and kind of same kind of thing. Another colleague from GE used to run
Yeah.
on the weekends, so I'd go down. I remember I made it like a mile with him, and I had to walk, and he
Yeah.
was he was looking at me like, what is going on? And that was every weekend I go out with him. He was really understanding and
Very patient. Yeah.
yeah, very patient. And it's kind of interesting because it ended up coming full circle, because later on, probably about 15 years later, he's from back east, and I was running the Vermont 100, and he came out and he ran like 6 miles with me. I was about
Oh
mile
yeah, yeah.
75.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you remember when we first went
First
out?
started.
Because I was having to slow down. I was 75 miles in the race. I was crushing it. I was like, come on, Jeff, let's go. And I was like, do you remember the first time when I went with you and I couldn't even like move? He's like, yeah, it's kind of the tables have turned. And
But when you started training, the first marathon, was it in Las Vegas? Is that what we talked about? The Las Vegas Marathon? You
yeah,
were you were 2 months out
yeah,
from the start of that marathon. You did not have a huge amount of time to
yeah.
train and get ready.
No,
Um, but you did, and you ran the marathon. You crossed the finish line, and as you described to me when we were talking, you're in a pretty considerable amount of pain
yeah, it
after
was
you wrapped up.
it was rough. And actually what happened, so I had a couple months to train,
Yeah.
and about 2 weeks before the marathon, I ended up coming down with dengue fever in Puerto Rico. There was an outbreak.
Oh my gosh.
And at that point, I thought, I was like, there's no way I'm going to do this marathon. I had a meeting with GE, a global meeting. So I flew from Puerto Rico to LA, did the meeting. I'm a mess. And then it was my
With
mom's
dengue fever.
with dengue fever. Well, at the tail end.
Yeah.
And then what I did was I met my mom for her 60th birthday in Las Vegas, and we are going to celebrate 60th birthday. I kept telling my mom, I was like, we'll just get there. Let's just see what happens. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to run it or not. We'll just make the decision on the day. Like, I'm registered, and the day came and off I went. And it was, Yeah, I ended up walking
Yeah.
at points in that marathon, and I was asking people, but there was no way to just stop because I didn't know where I was at and I couldn't see.
Yeah.
I just kept asking people like, how much further? Like, you're almost there. It's always you're almost there. Like you could
Yeah.
be 5 miles into a marathon, they're like, you're almost there. You're looking
Everything's
great.
relative.
Yeah, and when I crossed the finish line there, I remember I crossed and I saw my mom and I just cramped, like my legs cramped, my hands cramped. It felt like my face cramped. I fell down and I just absolutely could not move. It was unbelievable, what had happened to my body. I never knew that could actually happen. And yeah, I was alive, but
Yeah.
I wished I wasn't.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you also talk about like you're in this pretty remarkable physical pain. But your mind, you said, was experiencing something different than separate from that pain. Can you explain what you recall from that moment of having just completed that physical event and where it kind of started to lead you?
Well, when I crossed that finish line, I saw something within myself that I never knew existed. What had become possible was something that I thought was impossible.
Mm.
Like I don't use that word anymore, but
Yeah.
that's probably one of the last times. And it was interesting. Like even in that horrible physical state that I was at, I had this desire for more. Like maybe there's more. And that's been a similar desire throughout my life. And I think that's a similar narrative that's within all of us. What am I capable of and
Mm.
what is my potential? What is possible? And when we really explore the depths of that, I don't think there ever is a finite point there, but that was the beginning of my journey with that. And at the end of that marathon was ran in December, and after I had recovered and gotten back to Puerto Rico, and a couple weeks later, I was like, wow, I don't feel so bad. Like I don't feel like dying. And I signed up for another marathon, and I had this dream. I was like, I heard of the Boston Marathon, and I think that's like a time qualifier. It's kind of like a lot of these marathoners strive for it. I heard it in Las Vegas. So I was like, well, I'm going to go after the Boston Marathon. Like, I don't know what I have to do, but I signed up for another marathon, country music marathon, Nashville. It was 4 months later, and I heard that 4 months was kind of like the appropriate training block. And I
You're
was
actually
like,
giving yourself some time this time.
I'm going to train.
Yep.
And I went and I ran that and I qualified for Boston. And it was absolutely amazing. And, that it just led to more and more. And it was a really good thing for me at that point in my life. I mean, I was early 30s and I was in a real bad place physically.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it because I felt impenetrable. At
Yeah.
that age,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm 54 now. If I'd have kept living that lifestyle, I don't know, I'd be talking to you right now just because it's so hard on your body. But, that next Boston qualifier led to triathlons I started. And, 4 months after I did my first sprint triathlon, I was doing an Ironman triathlon and it just kept going on.
Is it this thing where the mental benefit that you had is immediate and the physical self needs to catch up? Or is it something different that just you're getting so much out of these events and the positive effect they're having on you mentally and then later physically? How does it all plus out?
Well, that's a real interesting thing because when I discovered this, I had no time.
Hmm.
Married, I had three kids, one with special needs. I'm the general manager of GE Capital down in the Caribbean, and there's no time. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden, there is time for training for these huge swim sessions, these huge bike sessions, these huge run sessions. And what I realized was it made me better in all areas of my life. I
Yeah.
thought clear, it was just better. And the things that were not so healthy in my life, the drinking, the fried foods, all that other stuff, just kind of started to wane out because it really impacted my ability to put in these other huge hours to get
You
the
saw the
sleep that I
effect.
needed. Absolutely. It naturally transformed my life and it became a lifestyle, not because of a conscious choice, because it just evolved into that. And I realized I can do even more. It was just incredible to me what the human body could do. I came across other people who you would think, how on earth did you do an Ironman triathlon? But they inspired me. I was like,
Yeah.
wow. And then I
Yeah.
asked questions. I'd be like, well, maybe I can do what you did.
Yeah.
And then you kind of figure your way out and you realize you can do some really incredible and really special things. And the other thing that I had going on at the time, which we haven't really touched on, is I have this eye disease, this degenerative eye condition.
Yeah,
And so
we
I'll
should
just
probably bring that up.
yeah, I'll introduce that at age 14, but I look like I could see perfectly fine, but
Mm.
I can't see you, can't see
Okay.
the computer, but I know where to look.
Well, what you should just recognize is that there's an incredibly handsome man staring back at you.
That's what I've always heard. What?
Yeah. Yeah, so you do are visually impaired, right? You're legally
Yeah,
blind. So let's
yeah.
talk about that experience because I think a lot of people listening right now are like, okay, well, that's pretty amazing.
So
Transformed himself from this person who was kind of sedentary into running these events, but you are visually impaired, which
yeah.
adds a whole nother layer onto this whole thing.
But just to start off, one thing as I explain my challenge or my situation, I think what is true is we all have our challenge. Like anybody listening to this has gone through their challenge. We don't get through life without going through it. So this is my particular little thing of one of many. But I'm 54 now at age 14, so 40 years ago. Wow, how time flies.
Yeah, that just took you back a little bit, didn't
Yeah,
it?
I was diagnosed with this thing called retinitis pigmentosa. It's kind of the cousin of macular degeneration. It's basically your retina dies, but it dies from the outside in. So what I end up doing is losing my rods and cones,
Mm,
and I end up with a tube, and that tube ends up into straws, pinholes, and then they say nothing.
mm-hmm,
The visual acuity, for some people it stays intact. For me it didn't. Early
mm-hmm,
on I was like, my visual acuity when I was 14, I had a peripheral field pretty good, and I had a blind spot here and there,
mm-hmm.
but it was pretty good peripheral field. Like I could pick out what was going on. My eyesight, my acuity was like 20/80 in one eye, 21/50 in one eye. Now as I speak to you, my tunnel is like that with
Okay.
each eye,
Yep.
so I see through that. I don't see like that stuff,
Yep.
what's
All
out
the
there.
peripheral
Like,
vision.
right there is what
Yeah.
I see. And then my acuity is 2800. So
Not great.
if you go read an eye chart, like the regular eye chart, you guys go and see, I can't even make out, the E. That
Yeah.
usually it's the
Not the
initial.
big E at the top.
Yeah, the
Right.
big E. And usually like now with my eyesight, they just have different E's that like face different ways. You don't even go to letters.
Okay.
And so in any event, that's been something that was progressing all through this time. And when I was in my early 30s, I was supposed to be lights out blind. Well, I had become a lawyer. I was a lawyer for a while. I switched into business, worked for GE,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't telling anybody about it because I was afraid. I was afraid I would
Yeah.
be,
What's the impact going to be?
yeah, I'd be discriminated. Who wants to hire a blind lawyer to defend me? What are you going to miss? Or who wants to hire a blind guy to lead GE Capital? Like, what's going on? Can you see all these spreadsheets? How are you going to do with human resource? Just all these negative issues went through my brain.
Well,
And I
for the Marvel fans out there, if you do hire a blind lawyer, he is going to turn out to be the Daredevil, and
Daredevil.
that's going to be actually a huge benefit. So no, so you're very sensitive to how the perception from other people would be.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And and I've seen it, and I've actually experienced it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But as I was going through this and starting this training, and imagine I'm going out to do an Ironman, and I'm riding a time trial bike with a tunnel. At this point in time, my eyesight was probably like about right there,
Yeah.
and my acuity is off, probably like about I don't know where I was at acuity. I stopped going to the eye doctor. I used to go to the eye doctor every year, and it
Yeah.
was the same thing over and over again. They say, "Gosh, you have advanced retinitis pigmentosa. You're going blind.
Yep.
There's
I'm
nothing we
aware.
can do for you, but come
Yeah.
back next year for your eye health
So we
exam."
can tell you again.
Yeah, and it was just depressing. So
So when you're competing though, when you're running, when you're on the bike,
yeah.
what accommodations do you need to make in order to compete effectively for you? Is it mostly just looking through that tunnel and keeping your focus down the road? Do you have someone going alongside? How does that manifest?
So at that point in time, I wasn't using any accommodation.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was keen off of other people. I didn't even realize it because I really didn't know blind people at that point in time. What I was doing was I was using guides,
Hmm.
but it was an intuitive use of guides using other people. So for instance, in a marathon, I couldn't see, like a lot of times you're coming up to a turn, and maybe the half marathon, the marathon goes different ways.
Oh, right.
I can't see which way, and somebody's
Yeah.
screaming marathon that way, half marathon that way. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Define that way. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm like going into it. Sometimes I'd have to stop. They look at me like, "What are you talking about?" I just pointed, and it's too much to try to explain. I
Yeah, yeah.
can't So
Yeah.
usually I do is I partner up with hey, are you running the marathon? Yep. Then I just
Okay.
follow where that person
So
goes.
find someone along the way.
Yes, a guide. And what I do is
Hmm.
I would find people in these triathlons, those became really interesting too, because in the swim, I could never see where you're swimming to. Like I remember my first triathlon, it was in the ocean in Puerto Rico. I was like, what's the swim course? They said, you swim to that buoy and then you go turn left and you swim to that buoy. Then you come back. I was like, where's the buoy? And he's
Buoy.
like, it's that orange one out there. I was like, oh, shoot, I can't see. Bang, the gun goes off. I'm like,
And
this
I'm
is
in a thick
horrible.
of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just started following the splashes and I was in last place. I remember I was like, I am lost in the ocean. And I just started like swimming and kept putting my head up. Finally, I saw something orange, went to that, and then I swam back to shore, came out like, I mean, it was terrifying. And then,
Oh
get
my
on the
God.
bike and start chasing people. So what you do is you just use your senses and
Right.
you ask and you just don't
You
quit.
figure it out.
Figure it out.
Yeah, along the way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here's the thing, Jason. Like, the story is pretty amazing just based on what we've covered already, right? A blind man with an unhealthy lifestyle changes his life for his autistic son and competes in major distance events, including marathons with minimal training. It's an amazing story on its own. Um, but there's another layer to this too, right? Because about 10 years ago, you're going through a challenging period in your life.
No.
And another one, right? Marriage had ended. I think you're struggling with depression, is how you were talking about it. And in the midst of this low point, you had, I think, what you described as an epiphany or an inspiration that you needed to do something to change it up again. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that period and what that moment, that clearly an inflection point for you was.
Yeah. Well, what's really important, and this I think is, the important. If there is an important part of the story, this is a really important part because all the cool title jobs, all the money, the marriages, the jobs were gone. The marriage had ended in divorced. I
Hmm.
had my kids half time.
Hmm.
I was driving at the time. I was able to get a license, but I had to go to an eye doctor. They had to sign off a thing every time I went to the DMV to renew my license. They had to drive with me with the inspector to ensure that I actually could see.
Hmm.
And but I was up driving and I had in the mountains and I was at a four-way stop and I had looked all the ways, took my foot off the brake, and the vehicle had begun to idle and it started going through the intersection. And this family of four ran right in front of my vehicle. I slammed on the brakes, didn't hit them. They
Hmm.
crossed laughing.
Yeah.
But what I realized was when I scanned and looked where they came from, I looked right there and
Yeah.
I did not see them. But
Yeah.
with tunnel vision, I could look right here and I don't see what's right here 1 degree, but they won't see that. And I realized at that point in time, this is not safe. I had a valid driver's license. I voluntarily stopped driving
Yeah.
in that divorce, unemployment. And what ended up happening was I had to confront this demon that I'd been living with my entire life and living in denial of. And finally had caught up. This eye thing was real.
Yeah.
And I became severely depressed. And it was not it was, beyond not a good place. I didn't know how I was going to be able to go on. I have these three kids, and
Hmm.
thoughts like that start going through your mind, and it was a mess. And I laid in bed for months, and I don't know that it was an epiphany. I call it a calling.
Mm.
And in my talks that I give, I call it a challenge to change. And sometimes we need to put a challenge in front of ourselves to change ourselves. In this case, I couldn't imagine a challenge. I couldn't get out of bed. I
Yeah.
couldn't shower. I couldn't do anything. I was going downhill and I was going out.
Yeah.
And what happened with me was I had a calling. It came from outside of me. And I didn't hear voices or something like that, but definitely a thought was put into my head because I'd never thought about this. And the thought was, it was like fact. I can describe it like it was yesterday. And the thought was, I am running across the United States. And I don't know where it came from. And I'm just kind of like, what just happened? What happened? And, in my mind, I thought, I'm a lawyer. I can pick that apart. I don't have to tell anybody. I can pretend like that never happened. I'll just continue laying in bed. let this depression go on and see what happened. But I knew it came. I was called, and I said, I am going to do this, and I didn't want to do it. God knows I didn't want. I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
I'm not working. So that began an 18-month journey of training, trying to figure out the logistics, trying to recruit sponsors, which never happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I tried.
Yeah.
And that began this 18-month journey to try to run across the United States.
So it's such a fascinating thing to be in this, what can only be described, I suppose, as this black hole of feeling, I don't know what's next. I don't know if there is a next. And then this concept appears to you. Well, not fully formed, right? Because there was still a lot of planning and everything to do, but crystalline. This was the thing that I love the word calling, because it did sort of just emerge from somewhere deep within you and called you, whether it was deep within you or far outside of you, I don't know. And that's a whole different podcast conversation. But there it was for you, and so you start planning something that feels almost inherently unplannable. Where do you even begin to start when you say, "Okay, I'm going to run across the country"?
It's insane. First thing you do, you get your butt out of bed,
Yeah.
and you start running.
You start running.
And that's the concept that we just hit on is the really crucial, pivotal piece. I hope that whoever's listening to this gets, and that's basically, you can be at your rock bottom,
Yeah,
with the clouds rolling in, absolutely with empty and no idea of how you can even move forward one more breath, one more day, and it can turn.
yeah.
And that's the thing that I experienced. And that's the crazy thing with this story, that I look back, because it's almost surreal. I know it happened to me as I tell this story. I know I was a participant in it. I was the main
You're the main character, man.
But it's so, to go back to that it's incredible. And how
it's
you
still kind of, you still have this bit of awe that it happened to you, is what I can see from you.
It's in awe. As I tell you about this, my 69-year-old mom was my crew, who drove a minivan across the U.S. for me, 3,063 miles from Los Angeles to New York. And my mom and I will still have conversations looking at each other like, I can't even believe, if I wasn't there,
I wouldn't believe
can't believe that happened. And, how you start doing this, you start, I knew I had to run, and my goal was going to be to run 50 miles a day or more.
How many?
50
miles per day.
50 per day. And that was pulled from out of the air, because I thought 3,000 miles across the US, 60 days, which is 2 months. That's the longest I could ever be away from my kids. And that's a stretch. So it's got to be 50 miles a day. And I was like, that's just what I have to do. I never realized that was, quote, world class. And what I did is I started running, and I started researching, and try and get in touch with other people who had ran across the US. Well, I stumbled across this guy, Marshall Ulrich, who'd crossed. He had the third fastest crossing. He lives in Colorado. I reached out and finally got in touch with the guy, and I told him about my situation. He's like, I will come to you and try to help you however I can. I mean, he is an incredible person.
He bought in.
We went to lunch, I remember, and I had my mom, and then I had another person who's volunteering, this 28-year-old something, Carly, and we all went to lunch with Marshall. And when Marshall shows up, it's like Michael Jordan is standing in your home. Like, this dude's climbed the 7 summits on the first attempt, oldest guy, done every eco challenge, ran deserts, like, just incredible.
A legend.
True legend. And we go to a little pub around the corner, and we're all sitting around, and first thing he's like, okay, so you want to run? He's like, all right, so how's your training and what's been going on? So I explain that. Sound like it kind of got his approval. He's like, okay,
So you're serious. He was vetting you a little bit.
Yeah, he's vetting me, because he's like trying to make sure it's going to be safe. And then we get to, well, who's going to, what crew are you going to have? When he crossed, he had like an RV, like a doctor, had his wife, like. And I looked at my mom. I was like, my mom.
I've got my mom.
Yeah, and my mom and him about the same age. He's like, I think we're about the same age. And there was a noted silence. Like, okay, that's a demerit. Like,
I was with you.
Yeah, he was with. Yeah, and then he's like, well, what are you going to try to run every day? I was like, 50 miles. And then he takes a deep breath. He's like, that's world-class standard, Jason.
Yeah.
And he explained to me, he said, only 6 people in history have ever crossed at 50 miles a day or more. And they have a much more extensive running resume than
Yes.
you. And those people who did cross, they had a crew of like 4 or 5 people, RV, scout vehicle, like all this extra support. And he didn't want to discourage me, but he's like, what you're going after is out there. And I remember one thing when we were leaving that, he was always encouraging, even to this day, like a mentor, a friend, just an incredible human being. But we were crossing the parking lot. And I remember that day, the one thing that he told me, which I came back to time and time again, and even outside that run, he said, when you go out there, Jason, you're going to experience pain like you've never experienced before, ever. And, what Marshall said, with everything he's done, he said that is the hardest thing that he's ever done, is to run across. And he said, when the pain comes, you look at it, you acknowledge it, you even talk to it, and then you let it know, now I know you're here. You're not going to stop me. Now I'm going to keep on running. And you just keep on doing your thing.
Did that comment from him give you pause, or did it say, I think I need that?
It was another piece in the tool belt.
Mm.
I was getting things from everywhere.
Yeah.
And Marshall ended up being this huge mentor because he was the only one that could understand what I was going through. And when I did get out there, when it actually had begun, and there were times when I was bottoming out, and I didn't know how I was going on, crying on the inside, I'd reach out to him, and regardless of where he was at in the world, immediately, as soon as I reached out, I would have my response.
Yeah, he knew what you were going through.
Yeah, and that was one person that could relate.
So you start running. You're averaging 50 miles a day. Are there, I mean, clearly there's hard moments, like you said. It's the pain is significant. The distance, the solitude, I imagine, is pretty significant. Even with mom in the sag wagon. But are there moments that stand out to you as you're crossing the United States, whether it's interactions with people or moments, we'll call them moments of grace, that you experienced while you're transiting the country?
Yeah. So there's one moment that does stand out, and it took me 1,500 miles, 30 days, halfway to get across the U.S. until it happened. I was in Kansas, and for the first half, it was an interesting experience. I mean, there was just incredible pain, new experience, emotional isolation, everything that you mentioned. And I always had headphones. I was listening to audiobooks, to music, anything that tried to distract myself from what was happening, because what I did not anticipate was the isolation.
Yeah.
For the first week, there's a lot of people who are following. I did daily Facebook posts, and that would kind of be my lifeline. But people move on with their life.
Right.
Like any of it, like, you pass away, people are going to mourn you for a little bit. And then after a month, it's on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And, for me, I take off, and after a week, it's on to the next thing. Everybody's doing their own life, and you get very, very lonely. And in my head, I kept going through my life, and, I ended up becoming a victim. Eventually I ended up, it started out great. This is wonderful, this and that, done that. That's like a day. And then you start dissecting it, and you start becoming judgmental. Negative energy starts feeding in, because it's all, it's trying to stop you. And I became a victim. Why did I have to lose that job? Why did that relationship have to end? Why did they do that to me? And then it got really real. And it became about, wow, I'm not really a good person either, because I did that to that person. You can't hide from yourself or your own deeds or your own sins, your trespasses, if you will, when you're in your head that long. You got to face yourself. And at 1,500 miles, that was the breaking point. And that was the point. And that day was the day that I forgave myself.
Wow.
I didn't sit there and write something and make a podcast and tell everybody. I didn't need to. All I needed to do was forgive myself, and, higher power, let that whole thing come together. And what I realized was, when I forgave myself, there was this huge burden that was let go. And at that point in time, I always thought I was pretty altruistic, pretty good guy. And I worked to try to forgive people. But what I realized, my actions were kind of like forgiving but not forgetting, because it would always come back and resurface. There was always
Bubble back up.
resentment. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't true forgiveness. When I was able to forgive myself, then I could start working on forgiving other people, truly forgiving other people and letting it all go. And that lesson transformed my life. And maybe that's one of many reasons that I was called to get out there and go do that.
Was there something that happened at the 1,500 mile mark, or was it just this cumulative moment of having been so internal and thinking about your past experience as so much that it was just at that time that that ability to forgive yourself came out, right? Was there a catalyst or was this just cumulative?
uh, there was a catalyst, and it goes into faith. And at that point in
Mm-hmm.
time, what I realized was, because I got to that point where, you know, these other people have wronged me. I'm a victim, but I have wronged other people. And
Yeah.
how can I reconcile that? And what I realized is I've been so hard on myself my entire life, perfectionist, all of that stuff. And I got to the point of where I came to, I'm like, God called me to do this thing. I'm out
Yeah.
here doing this, about dying. I don't even know why.
Right.
I don't even want to be out here, but I'm doing it. God, here I am. I'm running. And what I realized,
Thanks a lot, God.
yeah, what I realized is God has forgiven me. Like that morning, I was like, God has forgiven. God actually loves me in my broken state with all this bad stuff that I have done. And I'll do more bad stuff in the future, and he'll still forgive me. And when I
Mm,
realized that, I'm like, he has forgiven me. And if I cannot forgive myself, but God's forgiven me, who do I think I am?
yeah.
Do I think I'm God? And
Yeah.
that is when I think I stopped, when I became truly subservient, and I became like a lamb, a sheep. I was
Hmm.
like, you're the boss.
Yeah.
I'm just following, and I'm forgiving myself. And when I did that, that was the catalyst. And I don't know how that happened on that day, but I remember, because I had this GoPro, and I'd GoPro myself in the morning so my kids could hear my morning
Hmm.
thoughts and my end thoughts. And I was at 52 miles that day in Kansas, running like 8-minute miles with the GoPro out in front of me. Like, oh, this is wonderful. I've had like
Oh
this
my God, you
wonderful
got the
day.
spirit in you, didn't you?
Yeah, something was going on. And because I mean, it was, I don't want to say cataclysmic, but it was transitional.
Let's talk about the kids for just a second, because I actually listened to an NPR Soundcore episode you did with your daughter Sophia,
Uh,
and it's pretty emotional, right? And you dive into the heart of the difficulty of this decision to take this challenge across the U.S. It's obviously not just a physical decision, but it's a really emotional one too. Can you talk about their support of this?
my kids were young when I did this. Now they're older. Now my kids are, the oldest, Sierra, is 24. My son Sage is 23. Sophia's 18. So
Hmm.
back up, 8 years, nine
Yeah.
years. They never were anything but supportive of me. They never failed to believe in me. Sophia, her claim to fame, and I realize how important it was to me now, only with age and wisdom. She called me every single day, and
Mm.
she told me, I will call you every single day. And that was before I realized how isolated, how alone I would feel, how broken I was.
Mm.
And Sophia's a different kind of individual. She experiences the world through feeling. And I think, she was very young at that point in time, but she must have felt the hurt, the pain, the angst I was going through. And when I was leaving, and my mom was going to drive us out to the start point in LA, that morning she went to school, right down the school. I remember I walked her down to school holding her hand, and we were talking about everything. And it was just, blowing apart my heart.
Mm.
And, because the reality of this, that my kids supported me in doing this, because I told them this is something I felt like I had to do. But what they didn't know is that, I might not come back.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility I could die out there. People crossing the US on foot are hit by semis, trucks, all kinds of stuff. And I'd be doing this with my little tunnel. And, that was a really all throughout that, every step I took, every day I was apart from those kids, every close call I had, just fathoming, I may not come back to my kids.
Right.
Is this foolish? Is this stupid? And that's another thing too. Like, this is a calling. This is beyond me, and I'm just doing what I think I'm told to do. This is not my own desire.
Right. There's a little bit of taking the hands off the wheel for a little bit and just going what you've been called to do.
Yeah. And that's and that was what saved my life. That's what has me sitting here talking in front of you right now.
Mm,
Because had I not have crossed the US on foot, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
yeah. You had these two pretty pronounced moments in your life. We talked about the first one, obviously, before your marathon transformation when you're in Puerto Rico, and then this one. But I think it's safe to say, like, those moments of deciding to basically get up and run transformed you. And I'm wondering if you have, being the recipient of those, thoughts about that transformative power of almost forward momentum, like to get you almost literally and figuratively out of the place you're in and to that next spot. I mean, how does that connect and resonate for you?
Yeah. The how does Lao Tzu say it? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Sure.
Many times for me with my running buddies, we can all relate to, the hardest part is just getting out the door.
Yeah.
Once I take that first step and start running, I may not come back for 4 or 5 hours. And I'll be like, wow,
What
that
just
was
happened? Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah.
But if I didn't get out of bed and didn't get out that door, it would have never happened. And that's been true. I'm telling you right now, not just in athletics, that's what we've been mainly talking about, but I'll also tell you about that in my, business career, my professional career. It's taking that first step. I remember when I was a lawyer, I had my mom who was a paralegal, my stepfather was an attorney, my older brother was an attorney, and that's how I ended up becoming an attorney. But it was never my dream. I was just kind of following along. And I remember when it became the time for me to decide, I'm like, I really don't like this law thing. I don't like being in
Yeah.
litigation fighting. I want to try this business thing.
It's not the first time I've heard that from a lawyer.
Well, those are good lawyers. Uh, there are some good ones out there, but take that first step. When I took that step out of the law, but I was surrounded. My cohort was lawyers and judges, and everybody's like, "You're throwing away 10 years of your life. You're on partnership track. What are you doing? Take that first step." I was an outcast. 5 years later, I'm sitting in Puerto Rico leading GE Capital on an expat assignment, and all those lawyers like, "How did you get here?" Take that first step. And even, when you're challenged with something, many times a pioneer. This is the other thing I learned too, because there have been many pioneering moments in my life, changing careers, going out to Puerto Rico, running across the US, or charting out a different run, whatever it might be. But when you're first going out there, you're always looked at by the masses as like, oh, you're an oddball. You're not taking the conventional path, the road less traveled, one of my favorite
Right.
books ever. You're going on that road less traveled. Well, many times, if it's your road, it's going to be less traveled because it's your road. That's the thing we don't focus on.
Yeah.
Your road is always less traveled. It's going to be, unless you're going to live somebody else's life and just live conventional, how you're told. And at the end of days, when you're taking your last breath, there's something to be said. Or, you got to be brave and you go out there and you pioneer. Nobody believes you, but once that pioneer succeeds, once Lewis and Clark hit the other coast and then come back, woo!
I think it's like important to note too, it's not like you talk about the road less traveled, and it's not like you need to necessarily wake up and run across the country. Sometimes, going back to the first part of this conversation, sometimes it's just about that first lap around the track, right? It has to, the journey begins with a single step. And you've written a book about this experience, Running into the Dark, and you share the story at conferences around the world and things like that. And I'm assuming everything that you just mentioned is more or less what you're hoping people take away from your experience, that it can begin with something small. It can be something as crazy and monumental as running across the country, but it can begin, doesn't it?
It has to begin. And, when we first started, I said, I felt my calling was to run across the US. What I realize now, my calling is to speak and
Mm,
share with people.
Yeah.
And what happened was that run gave me the platform because I have not changed as a human being. I mean, I've evolved,
Yeah.
but I'm still the same old person, just a middle-aged guy with skinny legs and who's going blind, can't see that well, bumps into stuff and falls down. But I have a platform now to be able to share a lot of things. And what I've realized, regardless of what the audience is, if I'm talking 100 people or thousands of people, and I give a keynote talk, it's 45 minutes, do some question and answers afterward. I have given either 100 different talks or 1,000 different talks because what I'm talking about, that story about adversity and failure and resilience is the human journey. And I think we all have that story. Maybe the difference with me is I just get up on a stage and I bear it all and live it time and time again. And it doesn't get any easier. I'm taking off in a couple days to go do it again. And, I've told my client, I'll, it takes me 2 or 3 days to recover, to kind of get back and kind of tuck it away and package it back up because it's so real.
Yeah. It draws you out.
I feel it for everybody. And, after I talk, it's so interesting, the different things. When you're vulnerable with another person, it gives them permission to be vulnerable with themselves and with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had so many wonderful conversations with people who are really hurting after these talks. And, I do it 1,000 times just to have that experience, to think that, my journey of hurt, pain, suffering, it's the human condition. It's always ups and downs. When things are going great, enjoy them because they're not always going to be that way. They're going to get bad. Yeah. And when they bottom out, and somebody's got it feels like, they got their knee on your throat, just have patience because it's going to get better. And that constant cycle of ups and downs, that together is life. And that's the beauty of life. And that's how we learn to appreciate our life, not because it's just always comfortable or uncomfortable sometimes. It's the collective experiences taken together that make it so rich and make you be able to appreciate the opposite situations and look forward to going through the next one. And that's a life well lived because that's our life and it's beautiful.
Jason Romero, he's run across the United States of America. He's written a book about the experience running into the dark, and you can find him sharing his experience at conferences across the United States. Jason, thanks very much for spending time with us today. You mentioned a couple seconds ago having a period of time for questions and answers at the end of your conference sessions. Well, Jason, my friend, we're about to put you into the infamous lightning round. These are a series of questions that you do not know what is about to happen. I want you to give me, please, the first thing that comes into your mind as I ask you these questions. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Brace yourself. All right, so first one. How many pairs of running shoes does one need to run across the country?
28 pairs for me.
28 pairs for you. Okay, probably 647 for me. Best state in the union to run through?
I love them all. And I hate them all.
Okay, that's a very politically astute answer. Piece of advice for people who don't like running, who might want to get started.
Just start, take that first step, 180 steps per minute, 3 steps per second. You will never get injured and you will be able to run.
God, that's a great piece of advice. Is there a running event you won't do?
Western States 100.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that one.
And the reason for that is because there was a point where they were not permitting blind runners into the race. I showed up and I tried to talk with the race director. I showed up at the start line with my own crew and I was about to bandit the race. And then the race director came up and said, "Don't bandit my race. I will let blind people run my race." The next year they let a blind person in there, but I won't do it.
All right, very good. All right, so change thing. Favorite snack for quick energy?
Donuts.
Oh, that's such a great answer. Now I want a donut. And where can we next see you run? What's the next running event?
Colfax Marathon, hometown marathon here in Denver, Colorado in 3 weekends.
Very good. Jason Romero, thanks so much for spending the time.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at adcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And the theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.